He had been told the palace would be quiet, serene even, a marvel of Veltharian architecture, tall crystalline arches that shimmered like sunlight through ice, walls that pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins, and corridors that seemed to breathe. But no one mentioned the constant chitter of the cleaning drones, who chirped like caffeinated rodents and insisted on polishing the same spot on the floor over and over until it gleamed like it was about to file taxes. No one mentioned that his quarters would be so close to the central garden that the pollen filters would hum just loud enough to sabotage sleep. And certainly no one warned him that his bed, while allegedly constructed for maximum interspecies comfort, felt like it had been designed by someone who hated spines. He groaned and shifted, the silk-like sheets slipping off his shoulder. Another night of half-sleep and strange dreams. Or maybe it had just been that drink Prun had insisted he try. For acclamation, the butler had said, eyes twinkling with the mild sadism of someone who knew exactly how strong fermented kelpthorn nectar was to humans. Recovering from a diplomatic incident-turned-minor crash wasn't supposed to involve royal suites, but somewhere in the chain of formality, someone had decided it would be a good gesture to put the human cultural envoy in the east wing of the palace. He was still trying to decide if it was a peace offering or a clever way to monitor him more closely. Either way, he was too tired to care. He turned again and froze. There was someone in the room. She stood in the soft glow of the BioLite wall panels, rigid as a statue, eyes wide, mouth parted in a silent gasp. She looked like a ghost, or a dream. But dreams didn't blush that violently, and ghosts didn't drop their data pads in horror. They stared at each other. He blinked slowly. I don't usually get visitors at bedtime. Not since the incident with the ambassador from Hurrick Prime. Long story, involved a misunderstanding about pajamas. The woman didn't move. Her ears, long and delicately tapered, twitched slightly. She wore what looked like ceremonial robes, though her left sandal was missing, as though she'd rushed out halfway dressed. Her golden hair was a tangle of soft braids and unruly curls, a crown of accidental chaos that only emphasized the stiff awkwardness in her spine. He sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist. This is probably a good time to ask if I've accidentally wandered into someone else's room again. Still no response. Then slowly she lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, like someone afraid it might bite her. Her back was ramrod straight, hands clasped in her lap, gaze locked on the far wall. As if this wasn't the most bizarre thing she'd done all day, or possibly ever. He coughed lightly. So, this is happening. No answer. I was going to say I'm decent, but that depends on your cultural standards. If Veltharians find bare shoulders offensive, we're going to have to downgrade our alliance status. Still nothing, but her ears quivered again, like they wanted to laugh but were too polite. He tilted his head. You know, in most of my diplomatic training, we never covered what to do if a royal personage silently sits beside you in bed like an awkward dream sequence. A small sound escaped her, a squeak, maybe a stifled chuckle, maybe a minor internal system failure. Her face turned even redder. He softened his voice. Hey, you okay? Her eyes finally flicked to him, brief as a shooting star. I mistook the corridor. That's a very dignified way to say you barged into the wrong room and accidentally sat on a human. I didn't sit on you. Yet. She clutched the edge of the mattress with white-knuckled determination. He smiled gently. I'm Kai, cultural envoy, recovering from both shuttle crash and the aforementioned fermented drink. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I know who you are. Well, that saves time. And you are... She hesitated. Then, as if saying it aloud might trigger an alarm, she murmured, Aelith. Kai blinked. As in, the Princess Aelith? She flinched. Oh! He tried to sit straighter, which only made the sheet slip again. He yanked it up with a laugh. Sorry. Didn't realize I should have worn a diplomatic toga to bed tonight. You were supposed to be asleep. I was. Then I sensed a disturbance in the force. What? Sorry, old human joke. Forget I said it. Silence fell again, thick but not uncomfortable. She seemed calmer now, though her hand still trembled slightly. "Why didn't you leave?" he asked quietly. She swallowed. "I didn't want to be seen. By me. By the guards." He tilted his head. "You're not supposed to be here, are you?" "No. And yet, here you are." A beat. Then softly, "You looked peaceful." "I didn't want to wake you." He chuckled. "That may be the first time anyone's described my snoring as peaceful." Her lips twitched. Almost a smile. Almost. Outside, the palace nightlights dimmed further, as if acknowledging the lateness of the hour. A cool breeze stirred through the room's venting system, carrying a hint of the garden's floral scent. Eleth didn't move. Neither did Kai. He cleared his throat. "Well, if you plan to sit there quietly all night, I suppose I should at least offer you a pillow." She blinked. "Number I should go." He shrugged. "Your call, princess." She stood, hesitated, then looked down at him again. "You didn't ask me to leave." Kai met her eyes. "Didn't want to." She turned toward the door, paused again, then looked over her shoulder. "Good night, Kai." "Good night, Aelith." She slipped out silently, the door sealing behind her with a soft hiss. Kai lay back and stared at the ceiling. "Yep," he muttered. "Definitely should have worn the toga." The morning began with an aggressive knock and the unmistakable sound of someone dropping a tray. Kai blinked blearily at the ceiling, his brain still trying to decide if the previous night had actually happened or if he'd been experiencing some vivid dream fueled by post-crash medication and alien tea. The door hissed open. Prun, the ever-stoic palace butler, entered holding a silver tray of breakfast items, arranged with such precision it looked like it had been calibrated by a targeting system. His long, beetle-like arms made no noise as he moved, but his disapproval was palpable. "Did you sleep well, Ambassador Kai?" Prun asked, placing the tray on the side table with surgical delicacy. "No. Disturbances?" Kai propped himself up on an elbow. "Define disturbance." Prun blinked. "Any deviation from your expected rest pattern caused by unauthorized presence, hallucination, interspecies visitation, or otherwise disruptive stimuli." Kai considered this. "Nope. Smooth night. Slept like a radioactive kitten." "I do not know what that means." "That's all right. I barely do." Prun stared at him for a moment, as if trying to determine whether he was malfunctioning. Then with a curt bow, he turned to leave. "Oh, Prun?" The butler paused. "Out of curiosity," Kai said casually, "how often do high-ranking members of the royal family get lost in their own palace and end up in a visiting human's bedroom?" There was the briefest flicker of something behind Prun's eyes. "The palace is complex. Occasionally certain individuals lose their way." "I trust nothing untoward occurred?" Kai shrugged. "Depends on your definition of untoward." "I did offer her a pillow." Prun's nostrils flared. "Indeed, I shall update the ventilation schedule. Perhaps some additional lavender vapor infusion." With that cryptic comment, he departed. Kai sat up, stretched, and began picking at the breakfast. The green cubes tasted like lime, soap, and static electricity. The triangular bread had the texture of sadness. But the fruit, some kind of pulpy yellow orb that jiggled when poked, was surprisingly good. His datapad chimed. A message from the liaison team. He was to attend a garden tour that afternoon, accompanied by a cultural representative of the crown. No name, no details. Naturally, he suspected, the garden was less a garden and more a biotechnological marvel. Trees with transparent trunks showed the gentle movement of their nutrient flows, like glowing veins. Shrubs rearranged themselves politely to make room for visitors, and the flowers opened and closed with a faint chime, as if aware of their own theatrics. Aelith waited at the entrance. She wore a simpler dress this time, pale green, with silver thread embroidery that glinted when she moved. Her ears twitched slightly as she saw him, and her hands were locked in front of her as if afraid they might escape. "Hey," Kai said, grinning. "Getting lost again." "I'm the guide." "Well, that bodes well." She gave him a look, the kind that suggested she hadn't yet developed the muscle memory for sarcasm, but was trying very hard. They walked slowly through the garden paths, stopping at various points where Eleth would explain, haltingly, the significance of certain plants. The royal vine of anther, the sentient cactus of morning, the singing moss which only sang when no one was listening. Kai nodded, impressed, occasionally leaning close and whispering questions that made her flush and pretend she hadn't heard. "So," he said at one point, "do all your plants have jobs, or is that just a royal garden thing?" "Most serve functions. A few are decorative. Back home we have a plant called a fern. It doesn't sing, doesn't mourn, doesn't rearrange itself. It just exists." She looked at him with mock horror. "That's barbaric, right? And yet we let it into our living rooms." A laugh burst from her before she could stop it. It surprised them both. After a while, they settled onto a curved stone bench beside a pond that glowed faintly blue. Small fish with transparent fins darted beneath the surface, like bits of drifting starlight. Kai leaned back. "You ever just sit here, without anyone around?" She hesitated. "Rarely." He glanced at her. "Because you're not allowed, or because you're always being watched?" Aelith looked away. "Both." He let that sit for a moment. "Well, just so you know, if I had this place to myself for 5 minutes, I'd be doing interpretive dances on that rock over there." She smirked. "You're not allowed on the rocks. I'll take that as a challenge." They sat in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable, the kind of silence that allowed space to breathe, the kind that hinted at understanding. Finally, she said, "I shouldn't have come into your room last night." He shrugged. "I didn't mind. It was inappropriate." "Sure, but so is talking to a plant that mourns when you prune it, and we seem okay with that." She bit her lip. "I didn't want to feel alone." Kai looked at her, really looked at her. "You don't have to explain, but if you ever do want company again, I keep the pillow fluffed and the jokes slightly above average." She smiled, a real one this time. A chirp interrupted them, her comm device. She glanced at it, frowned, then stood. "I have to go. My mother, she expects—" She trailed off. He nodded. "Duty calls in," he said. "Just remember to tell the guards I'm harmless, mostly." As she turned to leave, she paused. "Do humans gift objects as tokens of friendship?" "Sometimes. I left something outside your door. It's a cultural artifact. From me." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried it's alive?" "No," she said, deadpan. "It's only mildly venomous." She disappeared down the path, robes trailing like vapor. That night, Kai found a small box beside his door. Inside was what looked like a carved piece of crystalline bone, shaped like a teardrop with etchings on every facet. When he picked it up, it played a soft chime. He smiled, turned it over in his hand and muttered, "Cultural exchange never looked so shiny." He set it on the shelf, turned off the lights, and as the garden outside whispered its music, he wondered when she'd sit beside him again. Kai was not expecting the gift to hatch. 3 days after Aleph left the crystalline token outside his door, it cracked, softly at first like ice under pressure, and released a puff of lavender mist that smelled suspiciously like optimism. From the fractured shell emerged a miniature creature with translucent wings and the legs of a smug grasshopper. It blinked at him, squeaked, and promptly tried to bite his finger. Not hard, just enough to declare dominion. He named it Oops. It followed him everywhere, floating in an erratic zigzag and emitting shrill commentary that sounded vaguely like a kazoo being stepped on. The palace staff refused to acknowledge it. When he asked Prun whether the creature posed a health risk, the butler replied, "Sir, if it hasn't dissolved your eyebrows by now, it has probably accepted you as part of its ecosystem." Kai began suspecting that this ecosystem included his boots, which Oops nested in, and his hair, which Oops attempted to style during diplomatic meetings. Speaking of meetings, they had grown exponentially more complex. Alien officials with names that sounded like algebraic functions insisted on giving him ceremonial scarves and offering to adopt him into their noble houses. One elder claimed to recognize him from a dream involving jellyfish diplomacy and a civil war over fermented root paste. Through it all, Kai smiled, nodded, and practiced the ancient human art of surviving confusion with charm and questionable jokes. But the highlight of his increasingly surreal itinerary remained the late evenings when Eleth would find an excuse to walk past his quarters, or through them. Sometimes she claimed to be inspecting airflow protocols. Other times, she had accidentally wandered off from a guided tour. Kai had started placing an extra pillow on the bench by his window, just in case she needed a place to recalibrate her internal compass. On the fifth night of this peculiar tradition, Eleth arrived holding a bowl of something that looked like semi-sentient pudding. "It's a royal delicacy," she explained, setting it on the table with a flourish that nearly sloshed it onto Oops, who shrieked and zipped into Kai's sleeve. "It's only served during the Festival of Unity." "Is that what this is?" Kai asked, eyeing the wobbly blob with suspicion. "Because it looks like something my cousin used to find under his bed. Once, before we had to evacuate. You're supposed to eat it with your fingers." "Of course, because utensils would insult its dignity." She smiled, dipped a finger, and tasted it without hesitation. He watched her carefully for any signs of transformation, combustion, or spontaneous existential crisis. "Well," he said finally, "if I grow antennae, I'm blaming you." He tasted it. To his surprise, it was oddly pleasant, sweet, fizzy, and slightly narcotic in the way it numbed his lips and made the stars outside his window seem to pulse in rhythm. "I see why this is a festival dish," he said, licking his fingers. "You don't care who you unify with after a bowl of this." Aelith chuckled, leaning back against the window frame. Her eyes were brighter tonight, her posture more relaxed. She seemed less like the cautious royal representative and more like someone who had remembered how to laugh without checking for consequences. "Do you ever wish you weren't all this?" he asked suddenly, gesturing vaguely at her gown, her insignia, the invisible weight on her shoulders. "All what?" "The princess bit, the formality, the diplomacy, the 27 rules about which direction to bow when sneezing." She tilted her head. "Sometimes, but duty is sacred," he finished for her. "Yeah, we have that too. Comes with guilt and occasional ulcers." She nodded solemnly. "And nervous twitching." He twitched theatrically. They both laughed, and for a moment, the space between them felt less like a diplomatic no-fly zone and more like something human, or at least compatible. Kai stood and walked to the window, peering out at the stars. "You know, this is the part of space travel they never show in the holovids, the long quiet, the weird gifts, the sentient footwear." Oops chirped in agreement from the fruit bowl. Aelith joined him, shoulder brushing his. "Do you miss home?" "Sometimes," he said. "Mostly I miss the coffee and the absence of formal robes. But this place, it's starting to grow on me, like a charming fungus." She looked at him sidelong. "That's the highest compliment in my culture." "I suspected as much." They stood in silence, listening to the quiet hum of the palace walls. Somewhere nearby, a vine rustled as it rearranged its leaves for better aesthetic impact. The room smelled faintly of spice and distant ozone. Then, without looking at him, Aelith said, "My mother has noticed my absences?" Kai raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess." "She's thrilled that her daughter is hanging out with a human who wears mismatched socks and talks to flying insects." Aelith bit back a smile. "Not exactly. Should I expect a strongly worded letter or an interplanetary duel?" "She wants to meet you." He turned to her, mock horror in his eyes. "Do I have to bow? Because I dislocated something the last time I tried that." "She's more formal than I am, but she won't bite." Reassuring, unless she's one of those ceremonial biters. "We had a diplomat once. Long story." "She's curious," Aelith continued, "and concerned. You're the first human to spend this much time with me. To see me, not just the position I hold." Kai softened. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you're doing a great job at being a person." She looked away, blinking fast. "You're very strange." "I get that a lot." They lingered by the window, and this time when her hand brushed his, she didn't pull it away. Later that night, after she had gone and the pudding bowl had ceased glowing ominously, Kai lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Oops curled up beside his ear, muttering tiny complaints. He wasn't sure what was happening, but it felt like something important had begun, a shift, a soft rebellion against roles written in stars and laws carved into ancient tablets. And somewhere out there, a queen was preparing to meet a man whose formal title was still technically crash survivor. He wondered if he should wear a tie. Kai had faced a lot of terrifying things in his short but adventurous life. Hyperdrive failure, feral vacuum tentacles, even his cousin Marcus's attempts at fusion cuisine. But none of that prepared him for the royal audience with Queen Salavera of Virelia. The fact that the official invitation had been delivered by a crystalline hawk that exploded into a symphony when opened did not help his nerves. Nor did the 3 separate briefings by palace staff regarding posture, pronunciation, and respectful hand placement during ceremonial hiccups. His outfit itched in places that hadn't itched since puberty. A deep violet tunic that shimmered like it had unresolved trauma, silver cuffs that refused to settle evenly on his wrists, and boots that clicked ominously with every step, as if warning everyone of his approach. He considered this a tactical advantage. "Remember," Prun said as they approached the central throne chamber, "Her Majesty is fond of directness, but not too direct. Be honest, but not blunt. Show warmth, but not visible perspiration. And if you see the sacred beetle, do not make eye contact." "Got it," Kai muttered. "Charm her without sweating, avoid eye contact with bugs, and don't accidentally trigger a cultural incident." Simple. The doors opened with the sound of 1,000 chimes collapsing into a puddle of music, and Kai was guided into a room that looked like a jewelry box had exploded in zero gravity. Columns of iridescent light spiraled around hanging platforms. Floral architecture unfurled like breathing sculpture. At the center of it all sat Queen Sayalavera, a regal figure draped in living cloth that shimmered with her heartbeat. Her long ears were adorned with memory rings, pulsing faintly with soft blue. She didn't look pleased, but she didn't look unpleased either. She looked curious. "You are the human," she said without preamble, her voice a blend of bells and disappointment. "Yes, ma'am. Kai Asher, resident of Earth, reformed space tourist, occasional pillow hog." A single eyebrow, longer and sharper than seemed safe, arched. "My daughter speaks of you." "She does?" he asked, feigning modesty and failing. "All good things, I hope." "She said you smell like static and pine bark. Better than what I usually get. Once someone said I smelled like recycled optimism. She also said you were kind and that you made her laugh." Kai nodded, managing a small smile. "It's a hobby. Right after avoiding death and collecting peculiar friendships." Queen Silver leaned forward, fingers steepled. "You've caused a ripple. Not all ripples are destructive, Mr. Asher. Some are necessary, but we are a culture of still water. Ripples are noted." "I'll try not to cannonball." A few attendants looked horrified. The queen let out a soft, amused hum. The sacred beetle waddled across the floor near his foot. He studiously looked away. "I wish to understand you," she said. "Not as a specimen, but as a variable." Kai frowned. "Like an unknown in an equation? Like a choice in a system that has forgotten how to choose." That hit deeper than he expected. They spoke for a long time. About Earth, about Virelia, about the illusion of certainty and the curious way humor disarmed complexity. She asked about his injury and why he hadn't returned home. He asked about her reign and whether she ever missed being anything other than a symbol. When he left the chamber, she didn't smile, but she touched 2 fingers to her temple. A sign, Prun later explained, of reserved blessing. Kai immediately tripped over the sacred beetle on his way out and had to catch himself with what he would later describe as a very dignified lunge. The beetle blinked slowly, unimpressed. Later that night, Aelith found him in the same place she always did, leaning against his window, looking like he'd gotten into a polite argument with fashion. "She said you weren't entirely a disaster," Aelith said by way of greeting. "High praise from a woman who probably terrifies meteor showers." "She's intrigued by you." "I get that a lot, mostly from border guards and very bold baristas." They sat on the bench in companionable silence. Oops fluttered overhead, dragging a ribbon it had stolen from the laundry chamber. "Do you think she'll allow this?" Kai asked eventually. "This? Us, whatever this is. Your mother seems strategically open-minded." Aelith tilted her head, her golden hair catching the moonlight that filtered through the crystalline walls. My mother doesn't forbid curiosity. She forbids recklessness. But we're not reckless, are we? Kai paused. Statistically, only sometimes. She nudged him with her elbow. She wants you to stay for the confluence. The giant glowy thing? It's a convergence of planetary orbits and energy fields, a ceremony of shared frequency. Only occurs once every few decades. Let me guess. Robes, rituals, and awkward chanting. And dancing. Of course, the final boss of every diplomatic event. She stood and offered him her hand. Then consider this training. He let her pull him up. I warn you, I've got 2 left feet, and one of them might still be on Earth. As they danced, clumsily at first, then with growing ease, under the shifting hues of Varelian starlight, Kai couldn't help but marvel at the turn his life had taken. From crash survivor to accidental ambassador. From solitude to strange companionship. From waking alone to falling into rhythm with someone who, despite being from an entirely different world, laughed at the same absurdities. In the corridor outside, Prun listened with his ear against the door, made a quiet note in his ledger. Subject, dangerously charming, potential threat to protocol, and walked away with the ghost of a smile. The day of the confluence arrived like a dream that had been prophesied by weather balloons. Calm, surreal, and improbably beautiful. The palace hummed with energy, not the tense kind that buzz before battle or family dinners, but a melodic, anticipatory vibration. Varelian silk banners danced in the artificial wind. Stars arranged themselves artfully above the domes, and Kai somehow had been fitted into a robe so luminous he briefly feared he might blind the queen by standing too close. You look like a sentient chandelier, Aelith told him. You look like someone who can say that without being punched, he replied. They stood side by side at the edge of the Grand Helix platform, where dignitaries, elders, and even the sacred beetle, wearing a suspiciously tiny crown, gathered. At the heart of it all was the Helix core, a rotating sculpture of gravity-locked crystal and memory threads that would pulse once every cycle, broadcasting a signal of unity through the solar weave. It was a ceremony, yes, but also a technological broadcast that synchronized quantum nodes throughout Varelian space. It was art, politics, and science, all in one sparkly event. Kai had absolutely no idea what he was supposed to do. You're supposed to place your hand here, Aelith said, pointing to a pedestal that glowed in a very touch-me-and-you-won't-die kind of way. What if I short-circuit the galaxy? Then we rebuild, stronger, more sarcastic. That sounds like your family motto. It is, actually. Translates loosely to, with caution and sass. As Kai stepped forward, he became aware of how silent the gathering had become. 1,000 eyes, 100 surveillance drones, and a choir of floating acolytes watched. He pressed his hand to the pedestal, expecting a shock or at least a buzz. Instead, the platform responded with a soft warmth, like dipping his fingers into memory. Images flickered in his mind, not his own, but the shared memories of this people. A celebration of life, unity, risk, and trust. There was an echo of laughter, a rush of color, and in the center of it all, Aelith, watching him. The helix pulsed, once, twice. The energy spiraled upward and outward. A wave of iridescent particles spread like a galactic heartbeat. There was no speech, no announcement, just a feeling of connection, of something old welcoming something new. He stepped back, half expecting someone to throw a medal at him or shout, "You're part of the family now." Instead, the queen gave a nod, so small, so precise, it might have been a wink in monarch speak. Later, under the low glow of the corridor lanterns, Kai stood with Aelith near the arboretum, watching the nebulae drift beyond the glass. He was quiet, not out of discomfort, but because he didn't want to ruin the moment with words that weren't ready yet. "You're different," she said finally. "I smell better?" he offered. "You've stopped looking for a way out." "I didn't realize I was doing that." "You were always looking over your shoulder. Now you're just here." He leaned against the wall, arms folded. "It's easier to stay when the place feels less like a cage and more like a strange garden of talking trees and bureaucratic beetles." You'll need to decide soon, she said softly. The diplomatic term ends next cycle. Your Earth Commission will want a report. Closure. I could write a report, Kai said thoughtfully. Chapter 1. Got injured. Chapter 2. Alien Palace. Chapter 3. Unexpected royal encounter. Chapter 4. Accidentally involved in quantum ceremony. Chapter 5. Fell in love with the moonlight. You forgot the chapter where you insulted a ceremonial statue. That was a misunderstanding. It looked smug. She smiled, then reached out, gently taking his hand. If you stayed, would it be for the palace? The science? The sacred beetle? Obviously the beetle, but also you. And the way you wrinkle your nose when you're amused, and how you blink exactly twice when you're nervous, and how this entire world with all its weirdness finally makes me feel less lost. Then stay, he laughed quietly. Just like that. No one else wants to room with you. It's for the good of the galaxy. He considered it, thought about Earth, its familiar gravity, its bagels and sunburns and late-night corner stores. Then he thought about this place, with its strange elegance, its wild unpredictability, its queen who listened like a scientist, and its princess who sat beside him when she didn't have to. I'll stay, he said, but only if I get to teach the sacred beetle how to play cards. Aeleth tilted her head. It already knows, it cheats. The weeks that followed were filled with small, strange joys. He was granted honorary ambassadorial status, which meant access to the good cafeteria and a strange badge that made vending machines give him extra snacks. He worked with Aeleth on a joint Earth-Varelian initiative to explore cross-species cultural humor, titled, Why Did the Human Cross the Gravity Field? He got better at dancing, worse at diplomatic phrasing, and once nearly started a minor interplanetary incident by referring to a royal envoy's hat as boldly offensive. He no longer felt like a guest. He felt like someone worth keeping. One evening, as they watched the twin moons rise over the edge of the Arboretum dome, Aeleth leaned into him, shoulder against shoulder. Still feel like a temporary visitor? She asked. He thought about it, then shook his head. Number I feel like a punctuation mark in your sentence. A semicolon or a period? A question mark. She laughed. That fits. As the light from the moon softened the lines of their silhouettes, as the sacred beetle dozed in a nearby planter, as the helix core continued its endless spin far above in the palace's center, Kai Asher, former tourist, accidental ambassador, and part-time robe model, finally stopped wondering where he belonged. Because somehow, against all odds, in a palace of stars and secrets, next to a woman who wasn't afraid to sit beside him in silence, he had found the only answer that mattered. The diplomatic ship Etheria's Grace sliced through the void like a polished dagger wrapped in starlight. Inside, everything pulsed with the quiet hum of advanced systems, translucent walls of phase glass, ambient lighting that shifted with occupants' moods, corridors scented faintly with imported Talvan orchids, the kind that bloomed once every 7 years and smelled like confidence. Princess Vareli of House Solvarin did not walk so much as glide. Her stride was trained from childhood to minimize footfall resonance, which was apparently a thing if one wished to look truly royal. Her heels made no sound on the composite crystal floor. Her long violet cloak shimmered behind her like it had opinions. 2 attendants flanked her in silence, both as anxious as uncharged plasma rifles. Vareli turned to the left, her destination, the royal receiving chamber, her mood miffed, her ears long and elegant, angled ever so slightly backward, subtle body language in Corellian culture, roughly translating to, I swear to the ancestors, if this human smells like burnt meat again, I am rewriting protocol. She paused at the chromatic doors, which parted with a whisper of permission. The chamber beyond was a blend of high art and military minimalism, a compromise made by the Galactic Accord Committee, who had clearly consulted neither artists nor soldiers. And there he was, the human. He stood near a holographic globe displaying planetary threat vectors, arms crossed, back straight, mouth in a thin line. No polished metals, no embroidered uniform. Just matte gray combat fiber, a patch on his arm that read UNFS, and a sidearm that looked like it had seen more years than some empires. She studied him for a full 10 seconds before speaking. "You're shorter than I expected." He looked up, eyebrows lifting. "And you're taller than the press briefings warned. Should have worn my climbing gear." A beat passed. Her lips twitched, but she denied the smile passage. "Staff Sergeant Riker, is it?" "Dane Riker, ma'am." "Do humans always address royalty like they're ordering at a food stall?" "Only when we're unsure whether to bow or duck." Another beat. This time her ears angled slightly more forward. Amusement, just barely. She circled him once, noting the way his eyes followed her. Never dropping, never wavering, but not confrontational either. Measured, evaluative, like he was cataloging exits, weapons, threats. She didn't like that. It made her feel like a civilian. "You will be accompanying me to the summit on Zarnex 9. You are to observe, deter danger, and otherwise be invisible. Is that clear?" "Ma'am, with all due respect, I've been invisible since deployment started. It's practically my specialty." The attendants glanced at each other. One suppressed a snort. Varelli narrowed her eyes at them, and the snort died a quiet, lonely death. She approached Riker, stopping close enough to see the faint scar under his left eye. Not recent, not cosmetic, the kind that says I've been hit hard and didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed further. "What is that on your belt?" she asked. He looked down. "Protein bar." "Are you seriously carrying Earth rations while aboard a Corellian flagship?" He held it up. "It's teriyaki. You guys don't do teriyaki. We have food synthesizers that can replicate the taste of binary sunset orchids." "That's great. Mine tastes like victory and regret." There was something about his tone. Bone dry, deadpan. Like he didn't need her approval but wasn't hostile either. And he didn't fidget. That was new. Even ambassadors tended to sweat a little in her presence. "Very well," she said, stepping back. "I expect daily reports, verbal, delivered precisely at the third quadrant hour. Brevity is preferred." "Roger that. Bullet points, occasional sarcasm, minimal drama. You may leave." He nodded, turned, and walked out like he hadn't just been dismissed by a woman who could technically have him vaporized if she filled out the right paperwork. The doors sealed behind him. Varelli stared for a moment longer, then turned to her aides. "He smells like ion oil." One aide nodded quickly. "Yes, your radiance." "And metal." "Yes, your radiance." "And faintly of mint?" The aide paused. "That may be gum, your radiance." She sat gracefully onto a kinetic couch, brushing a strand of white blonde hair behind her pointed ear. "Do all humans joke when they're nervous?" she asked. The aide hesitated. "I believe some of them joke because you're nervous." Varelli's ears twitched in offense. The aide immediately looked at the floor with sudden interest in the ship's groutless design. She turned her attention to a hovering datapad, flicked it with one long nail. Images floated upward. Schematics of Zarnex 9's summit chambers, seating protocols, biometric scans of various dignitaries. The human's file floated among them. Spartan, mostly redacted. She tapped it open. United Nations Forces, Tier 6 Tactical, served on 3 orbital fronts. Decorated, dishonorably reinstated following something called the Marnak Dispute. That sounds made up. The datapad helpfully displayed a grainy image. Riker in full exo-armor, standing atop a downed mech with a flag in one hand and a smoking plasma rifle in the other. His expression? Annoyed, like someone just interrupted his lunch. Her brow rose. "Bring me more data," she said, eyes still on the image, "and a translation of this teriyaki." Later that night, Riker sat alone in the observation lounge, boots on the edge of a console labeled, "Please do not rest feet here." He stared out at the curvature of a gas giant they were orbiting. Electric storms danced beneath its clouds like angry gods at a disco. He was nursing a cup of Corellian synth brew, tasted like carbonated pine needles and ambition. A small maintenance drone floated past, blinked at him, beeped once, and proceeded to scan his cup. "Don't judge me," Riker said. "You drink what's available, or you die of hydration boredom." The drone blinked twice, possibly in solidarity, and zipped off. Riker leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. He liked quiet, hadn't had much of it since the Marnak thing. He'd spent 6 months in a psychiatric debrief cycle that ended with someone shrugging and stamping fit for reassignment on his forehead, metaphorically speaking. Then came this gig. Alien royalty. Zero margin for error. Maximum chance of being lasered if someone sneezed wrong. He cracked one eye open and muttered, "Well, Dane, at least she didn't try to slap you. That's progress." Then sighing, he pulled a small notepad from his pocket, actual paper, ancient tech, his own quiet rebellion, and began writing. Day 1. Princess Tall. Room smells like space perfume and judgment. No immediate threats. She thinks I'm a joke. Might be fun to disappoint her. He tapped the pen twice, then wrote one more line. Also, teriyaki stock running low. Must ration. War crime. The shuttle docked with a soft clunk, magnetic seals engaging with a smooth, almost polite hum. The doors parted to reveal the interior of the Zarnex 9 diplomatic station, polished, sprawling, filled with species who had invented dozens of ways to say I'm important without ever using words. Princess Virelli descended first, draped in a gown woven from photoreactive filaments that shimmered according to the station's ambient starlight settings. Her attendants flanked her like ornamental satellites. She gave a regal nod to the welcoming dignitaries, all smiles and syllables so smooth they could have been greased. Riker exited behind her, wearing the same combat fibers as before, the same neutral expression, the same lack of shimmering anything. A Glarn ambassador glanced at him and then blinked 3 eyes in confusion. The reception hall was a marvel of architectural ego. Ceilings arched 3 stories high, displaying a rotating projection of major galactic events. Alliances forged, battles fought, planets declared tourist-friendly. Tables floated gently at waist height, dispensing refreshments to every palate imaginable. Virelli leaned slightly toward her aide and whispered, "Why is the beverage table giving me a tactical analysis of pineapple? Likely a translation error, Your Radiance." Riker was already sipping something pale blue and suspiciously fizzy. When he caught her eye, he raised the cup in salute. "Tastes like bubblegum and regret. Want some?" "No." She moved on. The summit protocols began immediately. Each delegation was assigned a sector within the vast diplomatic wing, complete with private quarters, holographic briefing domes, and decontamination spas that sounded far more enjoyable than they were. Riker, to his mild amusement, found his room located 2 doors down from hers. "This must be an error," Virelli declared. "Probably," Riker said, dropping his bag onto a sleek white recliner. "But I doubt they'll fix it unless someone threatens to sneeze a lawsuit." She narrowed her eyes at him. "You're strangely comfortable here." He looked around. Any place with gravity, plumbing, and a minibar's already better than Titan Outpost 7. She sat on the edge of the lounge chair, regarding him with a mix of curiosity and exasperation. What exactly was Titan Outpost 7? Cold, angry, full of people who thought sarcasm was a survival tactic. And were they wrong? "Mostly frozen," he said. "Hard to measure sarcasm through frostbite." She stood again, the hem of her dress changing hue as her mood adjusted. "There's a formal dinner in 2 hours. I assume you pack something less textile efficient?" "I brought a tie." "That is insufficient. Not if I wear it with confidence." She made a sound halfway between a sigh and a growl and left without another word. The dinner was a circus of etiquette, a maze of languages, gestures, and cutlery hierarchies. Virelli moved through it with the grace of someone who'd studied how to express condescension with a flick of her wrist. Riker, in a matte black blazer that looked like it had survived a minor explosion, stood against a wall near the dessert table and ate something that claimed to be stabilized fruit essence. At one point, Virelli was cornered by the Threxorian trade warden, who insisted on discussing multi-sector tariffs using an obscure dialect that involved clacking teeth and occasional bursts of steam. Riker watched for a moment, then sauntered over. "Pardon the interruption," he said smoothly, "but the princess is urgently needed for an Alliance-mandated photonic realignment procedure." The warden blinked. "What?" "She has to recalibrate her quantum aura. Regulation 14B, page 93. You know how it is." The warden bowed. "Ah, of course, diplomatic entropy." My apologies. Riker nodded solemnly. Entropy waits for no ambassador. He steered Varelli away by the elbow. What in the stars is a quantum aura? She hissed. Something I just made up. She looked at him, stunned, then laughed before she could catch herself. Staff Sergeant Riker, did you just rescue me? I try to limit it to once per summit, he said. Keeps expectations low. She sipped her drink and gave him a sidelong glance. I'll admit that was clever. I aim for charming, usually land on tolerable. She almost smiled again. Almost. Later that night, as diplomatic channels buzzed and security drones hummed down silent halls, Riker sat in the guest lounge, feet propped up on a low, glowing table. He was going over footage from the reception, nothing overtly suspicious, but one of the envoys from the Kylian consortium had a bodyguard with curious behavior patterns. He logged it, tagged the clip, and leaned back. A soft chime echoed from his wristband. Incoming message. Princess Varelli requests your presence in her observatory dome. Non-urgent. Formal tone, mildly annoyed. He raised an eyebrow. Formal tone, mildly annoyed, was basically royal, for I've decided you're marginally tolerable and wish to test that theory. The observatory was a glass hemisphere perched atop the summit tower, surrounded by stars on all sides. Varelli stood near the center, looking out at a nebula blooming violet and gold. I'm told humans find comfort in looking at stars, she said without turning. Sometimes, Riker said. Depends on whether they're exploding. She chuckled. Is everything a joke to you? Not everything, just most things that want to be serious too fast. She turned then, long ears twitching. You confuse me. That's fair. You're competent, intelligent. You even show restraint. So why do you pretend to be less? He walked forward slowly. Because people notice the threat less when they think it's lazy. She stared at him. Also, I enjoy irritating you. That, she said, I already suspected. He gestured to the stars. Which one's yours? She pointed without hesitation. That spiral cluster near the edge. The fifth from the left. Corellia's heart. Looks like a glowing pretzel. Do not insult my ancestors with carbohydrate comparisons. Sorry, glowing, regal pretzel. She laughed again, quiet this time. After a pause, she asked, why did you agree to this assignment? He hesitated. Because someone high up thought I needed redemption. Do you? Maybe. Or maybe they just needed someone disposable. She studied him for a long moment. You're not disposable, she said. You're annoying, but not disposable. High praise. I'll add it to my resume. They stood in silence for a while longer, watching the stars shift slowly in the artificial night. Eventually she said, Good night, Sergeant. Princess. He left the dome with his hands in his pockets and a small crooked smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. In his quarters, he opened the notepad again. Day 2. Dinner was less murdery than expected. Prevented minor diplomatic meltdown via fake science. Princess May possessed sense of humor. Unconfirmed. Still no sign of immediate danger. Beginning to like the stars here. Also note, find out what stabilized fruit essence actually is. The summit's second day opened with a diplomatic breakfast that had all the flavor and charm of chewing on compressed bureaucracy. The ambassadors convened in the crystalline Hall of Accord, an oval chamber where the acoustics were engineered to make even the loudest snore sound respectful. Hover displays projected real-time negotiation metrics, emotion heat maps, and one overly eager translator AI that kept misinterpreting metaphors. Princess Varelli sat in her designated seat, regal and composed, her long ears flicking occasionally in the direction of any delegate who used the phrase cross-species synergy more than twice. The Glarn were arguing with the Rosh over mining rights to an asteroid belt that technically didn't exist on most official maps. The conversation became so dense with legal subroutines that at one point, a mediator bot short-circuited and politely exploded. Riker stood behind her, silent, scanning. He'd adjusted his internal alert parameters after last night's review. The Kylian bodyguard had requested a private docking corridor, citing allergy to multilateral tension. Suspicious, even by political nonsense standards. Varelli leaned back slightly and whispered without turning, He's sweating again. Riker replied without moving. Glarn physiology. That's not sweat, it's an ambient excretion. What does that mean in standard? It means if he shakes your hand, you're going to smell like spicy jellyfish for 3 hours. She closed her eyes briefly. And to think my mother said this summit would be good for perspective. The conversation spiraled further when the Killian representative began a 15-minute soliloquy involving trade routes, ancestral curses, and a metaphor about economic stagnation that included fungus. Riker tapped his data feed and sent her a private note. If this keeps up, we may need to stage a minor fire to end the session. She almost snorted. Composure held barely. By mid-afternoon, the delegates dispersed for private meetings, which was summit code for go complain in new rooms. Varelli's scheduled appointment was with High Advisor Vel Thun of the Coalition of Arctis, known for his strict neutrality, political rigidity, and forehead that resembled a carved canyon. As they approached the advisor's chambers, 2 Killian guards stood outside. Riker noted the absence of standard diplomatic identifiers and the curious configuration of their sidearms. Long, slim weapons with plasma cores that pulsed in unusual rhythm. Varelli stopped. These guards weren't listed on the summit directory. They're new, Riker said. Or they're not guards. He stepped forward casually and gave a brief nod. Staff Sergeant Riker, UNFS. Mind if I confirm credentials? The guard on the left blinked slowly. Credentials not required. Summit security clearances. Riker smiled. That's cute. Unfortunately, that line hasn't worked since the Spire heist on Epsilon 5. You don't want me to recite my report voice. It's dry and includes footnotes. Both guards shifted. The one on the right reached for his wrist panel. Riker said. Any device movements without clearance result in immediate notification to my, already triggered auto alert drone. Look up. They glanced up. A small hovering unit stared down at them like a mechanical hawk with passive aggressive propellers. The first guard's hand twitched toward his weapon. Riker moved. It was a single motion. Clean, rehearsed. He stepped forward, disarmed the nearest with a twist of his wrist and a jab to the shoulder, then pivoted, elbowed the second one in the thorax joint, grabbed the plasma rifle, and had both of them on the floor in under 3 seconds. Varelli blinked. Was that necessary? They flinched wrong. People flinch wrong all the time. They flinched wrong near you. She stared at him for a moment. You really don't bluff, do you? Only with poker and committee meetings. The summit's internal security arrived shortly after, triggered by Riker's wristband. The 2 impersonators were taken into custody with minimal fuss, though one did complain loudly in a dialect that included whistling threats and 2 words that translated roughly as ankle cowards. Later, back in the private lounge, Varelli sat across from Riker, her tone uncharacteristically quiet. That was fast, she said. Too fast. Some threats don't send memos first. She folded her arms. How long have you suspected something? Since they requested a private corridor with no surveillance nodes. Most real bodyguards hate being isolated. Makes them nervous. Makes me curious. And what if you'd been wrong? I'm good at apologizing, not great at funerals. Her long ears flicked down, then back up, a gesture that meant reflection. Or possibly indigestion. It was hard to tell sometimes. You risked yourself. Yeah, Riker said. That's kind of the job. Most people wouldn't. Most people haven't been shot at enough times to get bored with it. She leaned back in her chair and stared at him for a long moment. My father used to say the strongest warriors are the ones who don't try to prove it all the time. I used to say that too, Riker said, but I think I was drunk. She laughed, genuinely now, a bright sound like metal catching wind. It made one of her aides in the corner drop a datapad in surprise. Varelli stood slowly. Come with me. He raised an eyebrow. Am I getting knighted? Because I left my ceremonial boots in the shuttle. Number, you're coming to the War Archive. He followed her through the winding upper levels of the station, where fewer delegates wandered and more data nodes thrummed. They entered a sealed chamber lined with holographic war records, strategic analysis, and historical recordings from across the galaxy. I wasn't going to show you this, she said, but after today, you deserve context. She activated a panel. A display unfolded in layers of light and memory. Images of her homeworld under siege 2 years ago. Invasion forces, firestorms, a lone Corellian outpost holding against impossible odds, a child being pulled from rubble, a soldier dying on his feet to buy time. That last one, she said, he was my cousin. He didn't wear the crest, didn't carry the banners, but he stood and fought. I watched it live. Riker didn't speak. Ever since, she said, I've had trouble believing strength could come from outside our ranks. You're rewriting that belief. Riker watched the flickering image of the fallen soldier. He fought well. He fought like you did today. They stood in silence a while longer, until the archive dimmed. Back in his quarters, Riker sat down, pulled out the notepad and began writing. Day 3. Summit now includes fake guards and allergic politics. Prevented possible assassination. Impressed alien princess. Was not knighted. Still better than Tuesday. The next morning, a fleet of 27 diplomatic shuttles arrived late, a record even by Summit standards. They belonged to the Jorth Combine, a species known primarily for their punctuality, passion for paperwork, and universal distrust of chairs. Their entire delegation held the opening meeting, standing around a levitating orb that served no purpose except to hum dramatically when someone made a point. Varelli watched the Jorth ambassador for 5 minutes before whispering, "Does the orb always vibrate when she says the word stability?" Riker replied without looking up from his scan device. "Yep, might be programmed that way, or haunted. Could be a haunted orb situation. Is that common?" "More than you'd think. Less than you'd hope." The princess shifted slightly. "I'm beginning to suspect the entire purpose of this summit is to test the patience of everyone involved until someone snaps and declares war over dessert." "Honestly," Riker said, "dessert's the only part of this thing I trust." The day's first item was a trilateral debate about atmospheric compensation agreements on moons that had no inhabitants, no agriculture, and no actual atmosphere. It went on for 90 minutes. 2 drones lost power mid-session. Riker quietly timed how long the Killian trade rep could speak without breathing. 7 minutes and 42 seconds, a new summit record. Around noon, something changed. It started with a flicker in the holographic transcript stream, barely perceptible. Then came a duplicate signal from the same node 2 milliseconds later, followed by a third. It was the digital equivalent of someone whispering the same thing 3 times in your ear, hoping you'd believe the echo. Riker tapped into the summit's secure comms line and ran a trace. Signal looped through 5 relay stations, dipped into a commercial satellite array, then rerouted through something labeled Summit Coffee Supply. He blinked. Someone's piggybacking comms through the espresso dispensers. Varelli sipped her drink. That's either genius or deeply sacrilegious. Riker sent a silent alert to internal security, then pinged the anomaly's origin node. The response came in a heartbeat, a short burst of encrypted data, followed by a scrambled image of the summit floor plan and a 3-second video clip. It showed Varelli standing alone in the corridor outside the observatory, time-stamped 3 hours in the future. "Well," Riker said, "I officially don't like that." Varelli read the clip. "It's a predictive model." He nodded. "More than that. Someone's trying to lure you somewhere, possibly banking on your schedule staying predictable." She considered this, "which means they know I'm not paranoid enough." "Don't worry," Riker said. "I brought extra paranoia." They revised her schedule, swapped a cultural diplomacy panel with an economic sustainability symposium, which sounded identical on paper, but required an entirely different set of meaningless buzzwords. Riker arranged for a decoy, a holographic projection of the princess escorted by 2 chatty guards and an over-eager diplomat who believed loudly in interstellar snack diplomacy. The real Varelli followed Riker through maintenance corridors not shown on the summit maps. "You do this a lot?" she asked as they passed a filtration node humming with ancient energy. "Diplomatic shadow walking?" "Occasionally. It's like hide and seek, except everyone's armed and no one's happy." "Sounds charming. Wait till you see the part where we crawl through a gravity vent." They emerged in a storage deck 3 levels beneath the summit floor, quiet except for the occasional vibration of cargo lift engines. Riker checked the map overlay on his wristband, then gestured toward a reinforced door marked Hazardous Archival Subsystem. Do not access without 8 forms of clearance. Varelli raised an eyebrow. Do you have 8 forms of clearance? Technically, I have 0, but I have a portable descrambler and a healthy disrespect for bureaucracy. The door hissed open. Inside, rows of obsolete data cores flickered in idle sleep. He motioned for silence, then knelt beside one of the control panels and plugged in. After a short exchange of beeps and insults from the machine, he pulled up a shadow protocol log. It's a relay hub, he whispered. This system's been tapped to relay predictive movement models to an unknown receiver. Someone's running a behavioral pattern sim on you. Could be AI-assisted or psychic. Psychic? Or some creepy guy in a basement with a lot of graphs. Either way, they're planning a move. Suddenly, the lights dimmed. Riker's scanner pulsed red. Movement. 2 contacts approaching from the northern stairwell. He tapped a command into the panel. A hidden vent popped open on the far side of the room. This way. They slid into the vent, barely big enough for 1, definitely not comfortable for 2, and dropped into an access shaft lit by faint blue emergency strips. You enjoy this kind of thing? Varelli asked as they crawled. Riker grinned. Sure. Reminds me of family vacations. Your family crawled through ducts? But they argued in small, confined spaces. Footsteps echoed above them. Varelli held her breath. Riker placed a hand gently on her arm and mouthed, almost clear. They waited. The sounds faded. When they emerged near the summit's southern conservatory, an indoor jungle powered by simulated sunlight and inexplicably filled with bioluminescent squirrels, Varelli brushed herself off and said, I'm beginning to think someone really wants me off this station. They'll have to get through me first. Convenient. You're very large and hard to miss. I try. They made their way back to her chambers, the path obscured by changing security patrols and a few well-placed miscommunications Riker seated earlier in the day. Once inside, Varelli slumped onto the nearest couch and kicked off her boots. I used to think summits were boring. I miss boring. Boring doesn't need bodyguards, Riker said, checking the locks. She looked at him thoughtfully. You've kept me alive 3 times in 4 days. Technically 2.5. That last one was just advanced scheduling management. She smiled. You're very good at this, pretending to be average. Thanks. I work hard to keep expectations dangerously low. She reached for a tablet and opened a secure line to her homeworld. The encryption was ancient Corellian, a code only 2 living people could break. What are you doing? Riker asked. Calling someone I trust. It's time we found out who's behind the targeting. Want me to stay? She looked up. You're already on the line. He nodded. Guess I better put on my formal voice. Please don't, he grinned. In his notes later that night, Riker wrote, Day 4, infiltrated secret archive, climbed through vents, dodged psychic espresso signals. Princess confirmed. Not boring. Summit confirmed, haunted. The final day of the summit began with a breakfast buffet labeled Species-Neutral Delicacies, which included 3 kinds of nutrient paste, 1 floating cube that blinked ominously, and a stack of pancakes with the structural density of neutron stars. Riker prodded one with his fork and muttered, This may be how empires fall. Varelli entered the chamber moments later, wearing her official diplomatic attire, deep violet robes lined with silver nanothread, an elaborate crest at her collar, and a faint expression of someone who had just been briefed on 5 assassination attempts before coffee. They tried to detonate the water vaporizer, she said as she sat beside him. That's a new one, Riker said. What was the plan? Dehydration through mildly inconvenient humidity? She glanced at him. I'm beginning to suspect the actual goal is to drive me insane via absurdity. Then they underestimated your tolerance. You've survived 4 days of planetary tax negotiations. The summit was scheduled to end in 6 hours with the signing of the Interplanetary Trade Accord and the launching of an artificial comet shaped like a handshake. No one understood the purpose of the comet. The Jorith insisted it symbolized unity. The Killians claimed it disrupted migratory moths. The humans just wanted to put their logo on it. Riker had spent the last night combing through intercepted transmissions, hidden subroutines, and surveillance footage that suggested one undeniable fact. The attempt on Varelli wasn't rogue. It was coordinated. Someone within the summit's organizing body, possibly within the Tri-Faction Peace Bureau, had sanctioned her removal. The motives were clear now. Varelli was pushing for a neutral AI oversight coalition. Several factions stood to lose power, influence, or access to the data monopolies they'd built in secret. The Coalition of Arctis, long respected for its transparency, had recently developed neural simulators capable of real-time predictive diplomacy. If Varelli's proposal passed, the simulators would become public property. So someone decided to unplug her from the equation. Riker checked the summit floor plan again, highlighting escape routes, blind spots, and any zone labeled storage that might contain either old cleaning bots or murder drones. Two of the contact names from intercepted comms had gone dark since yesterday. Another had booked a shuttle off the station an hour before dawn. The fourth had just entered the observation chamber, the final location for the closing ceremony. He turned to Varelli. "You're going to give your speech, then leave through the diplomatic corridor. I'll intercept the operative in the observatory. You're assuming it's not a decoy." "I'm assuming they're arrogant enough to be close when it happens." She hesitated. "And if they aren't? Then I make a dramatic entrance, accuse a chair of treason, and buy you 10 seconds to run." She smiled. "I'm beginning to suspect you enjoy this. Only because it's slightly less stressful than babysitting galactic parliament." 30 minutes later, Varelli stood at the podium in the observation chamber, stars swirling behind the crystal dome. Delegates filled the tiered seating, drones broadcast her image to 8 systems, and the handshake comet floated outside, waiting for launch. She spoke clearly, firmly, her words deliberate. "Today we unify not by consensus, but by courage. We step forward not because we are ready, but because hesitation has already cost us too much." Meanwhile, Riker slipped into the maintenance access above the observatory, eyes on thermal readings. One signature moved slowly behind the speaker's dais, the diplomat from Veltron 4. Too clean, too calm. He dropped through the access port just as the diplomat raised a hand toward a device disguised as a translation relay. The crowd gasped. Varelli didn't flinch. Riker fired a stun round, non-lethal. The diplomat crumpled. A second figure darted out from the shadows, smaller, faster. Varelli pivoted, grabbed the handshake ceremonial rod, and flung it like a spear. It collided with the assailant's shoulder. "That was impressive," Riker said, jogging up to cuff both attackers. "I grew up hunting hover moths," she replied, brushing off her robe. "They're faster." Security swarmed the chamber, sealing exits, confirming the identities. The diplomat was a proxy, a biologically enhanced clone. The second attacker, however, matched the retinal ID of Admiral Othvaran, member of the Tri-Faction Peace Bureau, an outspoken opponent of her AI treaty. Varelli stood over him as he hissed through fractured teeth. "You should have stayed quiet." She knelt down. "You should have read the new protocols. Assassination attempts now void all voting privileges." 3 hours later, the summit concluded. The treaty passed with overwhelming support, thanks in part to a sympathy wave and a perfectly timed viral image of Varelli holding the ceremonial handshake rod like a javelin. Riker's datapad buzzed with security commendations and a very concerned message from his CO that read, "What did you do to the comet?" He shrugged and turned it off. Back at the shuttle bay, Varelli met him at the embarkation platform. "So," she said, "you've saved my life several times, exposed an intergalactic conspiracy, and neutralized a diplomat with a stun baton you pulled from your pant leg. I aim to impress. You succeeded." They stood there awkward for once. "I have to return home," she said. "My people need me, and now they need to trust humans more than they ever have. Guess that means you'll have to invite us to more summits. Or fewer. Depends on whether you keep bringing pancakes that defy physics." A pause. "You've changed," she said. "When I first met you, I thought you were a glorified security cam in a uniform. And now? Now I think you're a glorified security cam with excellent timing and unexpected charm." Riker grinned. "I'll take it." She reached out, brushing a hand against his arm. Her long ears twitched slightly. an expression of respect, maybe affection. When we meet again, she said, don't be late. I'm never late, he replied. I just prefer dramatic entrances. He watched as her shuttle lifted off, slicing through the black, leaving a trail of silver ion behind. Later that night, he filed his final report. Final day. Threat neutralized. Treaty passed. Comet survived. Princess now officially unmocking. Pancakes still terrible. 10 out of 10 would protect again.